I
wasn't able to go, obviously. Sorry.
just want everybody to know that we're going live now on YouTube.
Okay. All righty.
Wasn't able to go this year, so this is my tribute to COVID.
Yeah.
Well, what's the red thing in the background? It looks like a shanty.
It's an ice fishing shanty. And if you look really close, right to the left of that, there's actually a tip up. It's kind of a little stick sticking up in the ice there. You can see it. It's kind of hard to see. Yeah. So that was my brother's friend's little ice fishing tent with he's in there with his son and a heater and probably a cooler full of beer, I think, at that time.
Exactly. All right.
So,
Hi,
Joe,
Siri. Welcome.
Oh, good.
Jerry?
Do we know, is anybody not going to make it today? Have you heard?
Carol has a couple of students she's dealing with and hopes to join us a little bit late.
Okay.
So
What about
Greg was going to join us by
Greg
was going to join us by phone.
Oh.
So I don't know if we want to give him a minute to get connected.
And Gene, how about Gene?
Oh yeah, he did reach out to me. I was under the impression that he'd be joining us.
Okay.
Let me just check my email to make sure he didn't send something new. No, I don't see anything new from him. So until Greg and Jean join us, and theoretically, if
And Tom?
Carol joins us late, Tom's here.
I'm here.
Oh, there you are. I can only see 5 people on my screen. We've got the speaker mode going here. Let's see.
Yeah. So we're missing Jean and
go.
Greg, and again,
There we
Carol
go.
will be late.
Okay. Here's Jane. Hey, Jane.
Hey, Gene.
Hello.
We hear you.
Yeah, took me a little while to get in, but I'm here.
Good, good.
All right.
I'm a technological pygmy.
Well, you answered the 5 questions correctly, right?
Yeah,
You stood
They
on one
couldn't-
foot.
I wouldn't have worked very well cracking the Enigma code.
Yeah, thank God that you weren't in that part of the forces.
That's right.
By the way, Gene, I started reading Ulysses S. Grant's memoirs. Have you ever read that?
I have not. I'm just starting on Stonewall Jackson, who's
Oh, yeah.
map maker. I'm kind of a Jedediah Hotchkiss. I find an interesting individual. But go ahead. Go ahead,
Well,
man. How are they?
it's very interesting. You know, this is his memoirs that he wrote while he was in retirement, essentially.
Yeah.
And at the prompting of Mark Twain, actually. So right now, I'm just at a point now where he's being stationed out in San Francisco. They just finished the Mexican War, but pretty interesting. I'm really more interested, I think, in his post-Civil War presidency issue. You know, during the Reformation, all that kind of stuff. I'm really curious to hear his perspective on that part of it.
Yeah.
You know, Reconstruction and everything.
Yeah, it would. I need to read that too. You know, Mark Twain once said the mildest winter he ever spent was the summer in San Francisco.
Well, I have to say, you know, at 5 o'clock in the middle of summertime, when that fog rolls in, it's amazing how the temperature just plummets down to 50, 45, 50 degrees.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
Greg, is that you? On the 241?
It is me, yes.
Okay,
Yep, that's
hey.
me.
Okay.
Hi.
Good to have you. I think we've got everybody now that we're going to have, except Carol, who will join us in a little while. We hope. So welcome, everybody. Thanks for taking part of your sunny Tuesday to join us from afar. As usual, this is kind of getting to be the routine, it seems. I don't know. We're getting used to it. Joe, thanks for sending out the agenda earlier today. And let's just go ahead and get started. Item 1, I'm not really sure what you have to report, but have at it. Progress.
Okay, well, yes. So for everyone's convenience, I sent the report that was given to the Board of Trustees at the February meeting, and I just wanted to cover 3 points rather than rehash the entire thing, because I think it's fairly self-explanatory. The first, and I'll pass the ball to Tom, it's about our various focus groups. We're of course trying to piece together one here shortly for discussion of the contents of our geology and hydrology themes. However, kind of out of the blue, Tom, if I could pass the baton to you, we had an unexpected opportunity which is related. So Tom, I don't know if you want to cover that real quick.
Sure. Yeah, I just had somebody contact me from DMME, the Department of Mines, Minerals, and Energy, expressing interest in the project. And he actually is an assistant director and lives in Augusta County. And so
Wow.
he wanted to share that they're actually producing some kind of a digital interactive way to look at geology. And he thought that might fit into our exhibit design. So Joe and I are going to try to find a time to meet with him and learn a little bit more. But he sounded very excited to, engage in the project and to volunteer his time. So
That's wonderful.
That's
yeah.
very cool. And that's got tremendous potential.
Yeah, I'm wondering why we haven't thought of DMME before, because they've got a lot of resources there in Charlottesville.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Yeah, it's a good connection. I know that they're over there, and I've never really had a personal connection to anybody who works there other than through John Miles at JMU, and he works with them and on energy issues. So this will be a good connection.
absolutely. Well, that's great. That's great news. Anything else, Joe, from the report?
Yeah, just a couple quick things related in a way. The next Wayne Theater lecture is March 16th, and that's going to be about aquatic restoration, and that's where Tom and I are going to try to time in a meeting with this guy from DMME. So I'm hoping we can make all of that work. So the lecture series rolls on. Last thing, I just want to pass the baton over to Ryan. We of course have some moderate success with our drive-through shows. We've done reptiles and dinosaurs down here. We did dinosaurs up in Waynesboro. Ryan, we got another one upcoming.
Oh, you're muted.
All right. So May 1st, we are planning for our next drive-through event in Waynesboro, and staff are working on a new theme, which is basically treasures from the vaults. So we're going to highlight our collections, the work that our curators do, and maybe partner with another agency like the Wildlife Center of Virginia. So looking at possibly doing sort of a dinosaur bird tie-in with some live animals. So more to come on that.
That'd be great. I told Joe mentioned that to me, and I'd be happy. Do you know Ed Clark? I know you do, Joe, and Tom certainly does. But yeah, I'd be happy to help encourage that or set up a meeting or whatever. I think Ed would be real excited about it.
Once we get the details down, time and whatnot, we'll
Okay.
reach out to you and see if you could just extend an invitation
Sure.
to them.
Sure.
So,
happy
Greg, we'd like to do this very much the same way we did the last one at the old DuPont lot, if that's still available. I think you helped us get permission to do that. So can we count on you for that again, please?
Yes. So yeah, we just connected you with our parks department who manages special events like that, which we'll be happy to do. As far as I know, construction will have not started on anything by May 1st. So we should be good to go. We'll definitely do that.
Thank you. Ryan or myself will reach out in the near future to make sure that happens. And Faye, that about concludes it for just sort of an overview of past progress and how it relates to what we're doing now.
I've got a quick question for Joe, if I could. Joe, were you able to connect with Chief Brainham?
Not yet, but that relates back to some discussions that I've had with staff. I know Carol's not here, But before I reached out to him, it was suggested by our team that we set up a Zoom with Carol Nash.
Yeah, good idea. Yeah.
So because she apparently already has connections there, so we thought
Yeah.
that would be probably the most appropriate way to go. So
Is that-
we're going to give
are
that
you-
a stab and see where-
Yeah, are you referring to the chief of the Monacan Nation?
Yeah, yeah.
Is that, oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
That's coming up on our agenda too, if there's more to discuss on that.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions for Joe? Moving on to legislative overview, what's happening with that, with specifically the budget item for our detailed design work. Is Ryan going to report on that, or Joe?
Jonathan.
Jonathan, I mean, get all you young folks mixed up. Jonathan.
They all look the
Okay.
same after a
They
certain
do,
age,
they
below a
do.
certain age.
Yeah, maybe once we get back in person, we
They've
can
got the
start,
same,
yeah.
beard going.
Yeah.
They're all young. That's all. But that's the issue.
All right, Jonathan.
So I'll try to follow the line items here. So where do we stand? There's been a lot of action in the last 2 weeks, as there seemingly always is. We were originally in the House budget as they proposed it, and we were not. The funds were not available in the Senate budget. They have since come together through conference, which is something that happens at the end of every session. So the finance committees get together, they're the top individuals, and they decide the next steps for Virginia. And luckily, coming out of conference, we were introduced into both the Senate and House versions in the FY22, so fiscal year 22, coming up July 1st of this year. So it's essentially the same thing that we were kind of looking forward to with this last budget that didn't make it in there because of the special session. So really, what do we know? I think what we've learned is that nothing is certain in this process. So although the funds are there, there's about 4 million in the, I haven't checked today, but there's 4 million in FY21. And then they've moved that police project to FY22. So there's about $14 million available for all the projects. That still needs to be voted on. So around April the 7th is the date I've been given by our budget analyst, is when we will know for sure on whether or not it is officially in the budget. Now, the language has always been there. It's just now that we're getting the funding back, so it doesn't change much. It will be fortunate if we make it in. Otherwise, we have to do a brand new proposal. You have to jump through all the same hoops, going through the budget office, and then you talk to the budget analyst, and they talk to their boss, and then we do a presentation, and then we go back up to, on the day to talk to the representatives. So if we can get this locked in, things will start moving forward pretty quickly. How do we proceed on that? From what I watched with the committees, I went back and watched all of them again. They just kind of breezed by the funding in the House. It was $10 million FY22 done. They spent maybe 30 seconds on looking it over. There wasn't any discussion on the FY22 projects. There was some on the FY21 things that were already in motion that are already part of the capital pool. So I think, sure, if we run into somebody thanking for their support, but I don't think reaching out to anyone at this point would be beneficial, or it would just be kind of null and void.
Yeah. Okay.
But what we're going to do in the meantime, we're going to start working on the RFQ for the new architect. We'll get everything lined up as if we are getting them funding. So we'll use some estimated dates, estimated times, and then an estimated amount in there. And then once we get the green light, some of you guys have been with the project and some are new. We do not know how much funding we're getting for the detailed planning portion yet. That'll be discussed after the legislation approves the funds. So out of that 10 million, we'll get 900,000 to 1,100,000 to do our thing. And at that point, we can go forward with RFQ and then get started on the detailed planning. So that's it's all really exciting. Still, you know, like I said earlier, nothing is certain, but it's certainly looking better than it was, and excited that we didn't lose a year. You know, we made progress, but it's exciting to move forward in FY22 instead of FY23-24.
Yeah. That looks very hopeful. So if all goes as we hope, when do you think you'll have to do the request for proposals, but then what would likely be the startup time to start actual work on the design?
I would say about 60 days after the first of the year, if we get funding. So
after the first of the fiscal year?
Yes, so after July 1st.
Okay,
So
July 1st, yeah.
It'll be a month. There's certain, you have to leave the RFQ out there for a certain amount of days. And then once we get that approved, then there's another 14 days. And then we can finally sign the contracts, and then we can move forward. So from 45 to 60 days following the July 1st.
We'll see if we can
And
accelerate.
Joe, do I assume that this committee will be helping with the review of the applicants?
Yes, so I would propose that we open it up the same way we did last time. It's a bigger committee now, so I'll leave it to the board's pleasure. However, I think we had, I can't remember now, but maybe 3 members of the of the WAC committee, the Waynesboro Advocacy Committee, participate in the review of the architectural proposals and the eventual selection of an architect. So I would just look for some guidance on that at the appropriate time.
What I would recommend is that this committee recommend that to the full board at our next meeting in May, and so that we get full board approval that would be our role moving forward.
Yeah. Okay, that sounds good. So we need to put that on the agenda for May. Okay. Any questions for Jonathan or Joe with regard to the funding for our detailed design work? Good work, Jonathan. You know, really appreciate your tracking it.
So does that,
you know, keeping us
does
informed.
Of course.
Sorry, does the $1 million get us to where we need to be, or do we need more than that to get actual construction drawings and that sort of thing?
So that is part of the 18 months. Would be we've gone a long way with the pre-planning. So I think 1.1 million would be enough to get us through to the part. So you'll get all your construction drawings done, but then the next phase will have to go back to be in the capital pool. And even then, we still have to fund the working drawings. So that's the plumbing, the electric, the arrows for exits, where's the ladder, where's the, you know, this office is named X. So there's still, even once you complete the detailed planning drawing phase, there's a whole, there's another larger working drawing process.
That's cost more than $1 million?
I would think once it's all said and done.
So really, you're talking about the real finer details of engineering and electrical and all that kind of stuff, right? That's second level. Yeah.
The second level.
It's basically translating the detailed design into documents that can be handed to a contractor.
The blueprint stage, yeah.
Exactly. And it has all the appropriate measurements and the height above ground where these exit signs go, and you know, all the details that allow the building to be set up to code. So in terms of timeline, this puts us, as Jonathan mentioned, in an 18-month kind of cycle. So we should be done with detailed design by the end of 2022. And at that point, the project goes to the General Assembly. We show we've done all due diligence. Nothing's written in stone, but we would fully expect that our cost estimates would then be taken up by the General Assembly and be placed, Jonathan, is the proper term, the construction pool at that point?
Yeah, capital pool.
Capital pool. And then that's when everything gets translated over into documents that could be handed to a contractor. Okay. So in a building of this size, you know, 18-month to 2-year construction, starting with the groundbreaking and ground improvement up to a full opening. So that would put us around mid, at best, very optimistically around mid 2024 or spring 2025 if things go well.
So Jonathan, just to clarify the whole budget thing. So we survived this budget, essentially, we're listed in there even though it was unfunded. If we don't survive this round, this modification or the whatever you call it, addition to the current budget, I think you said that would negate the previous approval and we'd have to start at the beginning again to get fully recognized into the next budget, the next biennium, right?
Yes, there are stages. Just having the language in there is the win. They would have to pass an amendment to remove our project specifically.
Okay, so it's going to stay in the queue, so to speak.
Right.
It's just a matter of getting, if they don't fund it this time around, then we got to go back in there and justify the funding.
Right, because the funds are going to, the cost of, the cost of doing business is going to go up. So we have to reapply and go through all the,
So it's a tweaking more than anything.
Correct.
Okay, I was concerned that I thought what I was hoping, what I'm glad you clarified, and I was hoping wasn't the case, is that, we were back to ground zero again of running around the General Assembly trying to convince everybody that they should support this, but that's good.
Not quite. Yeah.
Yeah, good.
Well, we are hoping for the best, and by April 7th, hopefully we will have the answer
Yes.
to whether it's a go or not. So, okay.
Beautiful.
We're going to move
Joe,
with
did
all
you-
due speed. We're going to move with all
Yeah.
due speed, as though, as like Jonathan said, that we are going to receive funding, and I'm hoping we can even accelerate some of this, such as take care of some of the posting requirements. You have to leave it posted for review for X amount of time. So we're going to see if we can get permission to do that in advance, even before the funds aren't freed up, because at that point we're not really.
Yeah, good.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah.
Oh, excellent. Great report. Very hopeful, positive. Which leads us to another great topic, I think. It's the next roundtable, which we're planning with a focus on diversity, which I think is very, very timely. And so, Joe, who should take the lead on this discussion? I see you have Siri. Carol's not with us yet. But
Can I just add one thing before we move on to that discussion? I shared an article, I think with you and maybe with Joe, about how people are rethinking the design of museums in the context of our experience through the pandemic here, and creating, well, let's say distanced opportunities to pay for your ticket, to enter the museum, and all of those kinds of things. And I just wanted to bring that up, as we move towards detailed planning. I think that might help us inform what we're thinking about regarding, the changes we see between what we did in the pre-planning study versus what we might see in the detailed plan.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up. I thought that was a great article, and probably we should share it with the entire committee. I was kind of thinking we did, but maybe not. But let's circulate that, because I think that's, it's definitely going to be something that needs to be considered when we're doing this planning. So,
yeah, one of the images that I saw in that article, for example, is a very open gallery kind of look to the entrance of the museum, where it's even open air. So we talked in the past about how this museum might be designed such that, moving from indoors to outdoors and outdoors to indoors is fairly seamless. And so I liked that look. Yeah. So if we distribute that article, I would just encourage people to take a look at that image. I think it was from a museum in Mexico. And that just gave me some interesting ideas about how we might design our own entrance.
Yeah, thanks again, Tom, for sharing that, for bringing it up. And we'll make sure everybody gets a copy of that.
All right, we'll do.
Okay, great. So on the topic of the next roundtable, Joe, do you want to kick that off?
Yeah, I'll just put it in context.
Carol's with us. Carol just joined. Hey, Carol.
Hey,
welcome.
Sorry to be late, you all.
Oh, that's fine. You're working.
I am more than I want to be.
Is that right?
Well, you know, 3 students having a meltdown at the same time. Yeah,
Oh,
sequential Zooms, but it's good to see you all.
good to see you. We're just starting to talk about the next roundtable. And we just got a great report from Jonathan on the fact that the budget allocation for the detailed planning is looking pretty good. We still are not there yet, but it's looking good. But that was the big news. So, Joe, do you want to kick off this conversation about the next roundtable?
Sure, I'll just put it into context here. So Christy Deathbridge is our education manager, and she had a good discussion or email exchange, I guess, with Siri Russell from our committee here. And, you know, it was about maybe connecting people to, and Siri, please correct me if I'm missing some details here and so forth, but basically connecting natural history back to the human experience. And that could be from everything from people of prehistoric times to people of known tribes from Virginia Indian cultures to the enslaved labor communities and so forth. So we met with her and talked about it, and we decided to fold into this as well. We thought it would be very appropriate on a number of levels for the museum to get introductions to either the chief of the Monacan Nation or perhaps some of the folks who work closely with him. That not only helps us with VMNH Waynesboro, but it also helps us overall with our archaeology program. And Dr. Bassett is very eager to make that connection. So we started to put all this together, and just in a kind of informal meeting with Siri, we had talked about maybe putting together a roundtable that ultimately I think, and Siri, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, would help shape us, help shape our thinking on how to best present in a respectful way the story of past and current cultures as it relates to the Shenandoah and the Blue Ridge, as we are going to be a place-based museum. So in other words, instead of people telling somebody else's story, let's get the story straight from these cultures or from the people who are related to them. So Siri, I wouldn't mind kind of leaning on you a little bit here if you wanted to add in any other details that you might have from our discussions and your thoughts.
Sure. First, happy Tuesday. Second, I'll be candid. It's not something I've given a whole lot of thought to. I just had sort of a general idea that I tossed out into the atmosphere. But I think that Joe represented that quite well. I don't know that I have anything to add. I'm certainly still familiarizing myself with the context of, this group and its work. But I think, any opportunity to sort of bring the community into our conversations is valuable.
May I speak to this?
I think, and Carol, yes, please.
So I work with a Monacan, and Victoria Ferguson, for example, is going to be visiting one of my classes for the next 2 weeks. I've been working with them for years now. And one of their biggest challenges is they are the only tribe in Western Virginia, west, sort of along the Blue Ridge. And so you can imagine that they are constantly being inundated with requests from people who will say to them, you are the tribe in Western Virginia, so would you help us? Can we tell your story? And one of the things that they have had to deal with extensively is trying to get across the message that, how do I want to put this? Their sense of their place and their location is not the Shenandoah Valley. They historically, and I wrote about a 70-page document for JMU on the complex history of Native people in the Valley. And there is no question that their ancestors were in the Valley, but for several hundred years, until the time of the European invasion, as I call it, not contact, invasion, they were in the Piedmont and the Blue Ridge, not in the Valley. The Valley was populated by other groups. And Vicki and I have talked about this a lot because, as you can imagine, for example, they get a lot of requests about land acknowledgement, and it has gotten to the point now where with their federal recognition and everything that has come along with that, you know, right now they're drinking through the hose just trying to put together the dispersing the funds from the CARES Act. You know, it's like being a federally recognized tribe is something new for them, as it is for the other tribes in Virginia. And they frankly did not have the infrastructure to deal with it. And it's like it just hit them all at once. And so on top of all of that, they're getting all of these requests about, may we tell your story? Will you partner with us? Will you know? And they are not the kind of folks who will just say, no, get out of my face. They are excited about the fact that people are really interested and want to make these connections. But at the same time, I think that, and I don't want to put words in her mouth, but I feel like they are not exactly comfortable with the automatic assumption that because of where they are, their story then should be part of everything that's told in Western Virginia or the Shenandoah Valley. It is the case that they are the closest federally recognized tribe. It is the closest that they are the closest state recognized tribe, the Monacan are. And that's important. And I'm not saying they shouldn't be at the table. By no means am I saying that. I'm just saying that I think it would be incorrect to begin that discussion with the assumption that somehow their story is going to be in the museum at Waynesboro.
Carol, you know, I agree with everything you said. I got to know some of them, Vicki and others, because they, as you know, are very involved at Natural Bridge,
right,
with the little village that they have there. And it was my understanding in talking to her and others is that while they didn't reside in the valley, they hunted in the valley, and they came, maybe not, but they came to Natural Bridge. I mean,
right,
there's
correct.
some connection with
Correct.
Natural Bridge.
Right, right.
But then there are other tribes that also use the valley, as you know, as hunting grounds.
Well, not really. That's
no,
part of the myth.
no.
That's part of the mythology. Yeah, that's one of the things we've really been working hard on, is trying to tell that story. And one of the problems is that in the, and I should send you all the link to this document I put together. A few early historians developed some ideas about who was here, and that those stories just got picked up and presented over and over again. You know, that the Iroquois owned the valley, that the Shawnee were, you know, and all of this. It's much more complicated than that. And part of the complication is the erasure. Part of the complication is the fact that because they were not here when Europeans settled in the area, that their story was not told. And so it's not as though, I mean, it is incumbent upon us to tell that story in the best way that we can. And it is true that the Monacan, their territorial lands go up the James River Valley. There is no question about it. But in terms of the Shenandoah Valley, that's a very different kind of story. And that's yeah.
And
Carol, this is Gene. I'd love to have the link to that
Sure.
paper you wrote.
Let me see if I can find it, and I'll.
Yeah, if you could send it to all of us, I think we'd
I'll
all
put the
be
link in the
interested.
chat. Yeah.
Can I also note, you know, I think what Carol said is really important. And I think that's another worthwhile conversation. I mean, that's a conversation in and of itself.
Correct.
The thing that I'm sort of wanting to explore is how can we have these community conversations and bring, you know, that are inclusive and that present interesting dynamic frames, right, to the sort of topics that the museum is dealing with. And I think that even the conversation that Carol just mentioned is a conversation, right? To talk about, you know, how you approach this work, some of the assumptions that come with it, right? I think, so I just wanted to sort of elevate that as like, that's an example of the kind of conversation we could have.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
So I'd like to reinforce Siri's point, because this whole discussion about the Monacan Nation was raised as a response to the video that was produced and actually broadcasted several months ago that generated a response from a person locally here in Waynesboro that was very disturbed by the fact that we didn't address in our planning. In fact, I had a conversation with this woman, a quite extensive one, and she's like, well, you know, you're going to plan this, you know, original inhabitants of the valley exhibit. You know, who from the Monacan tribe do you have involved in this?
Mhm.
You know, why would why would your curator not be from the Monacan? I mean, that very specific and forceful. So I think
Mhm.
politically, I think we really got to address this issue in a very, and I think Siri's right on the point there, in a very inclusive and very open way as we work through this, so that some of these preconceived notions don't totally weigh in or become controversy when it comes to funding or moving forward. I think that's very, very important. It's very sensitive at this point.
Oh, I understand that completely. Believe me. What I guess my point is just that I think it's important for us to keep in mind that as we have these discussions, absolutely bring the Monacan. You could invite the other tribes. I think it would be out of place to invite the other tribes to be part of this discussion. It's my concern is we should not expect that they are going to do our work for us. That we should expect that, you know, somehow they are going to help us write their story and then present it in the museum. That's what I worry about more than anything else. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we don't. I think you're right. You know, you don't. Well, I know that you're right. We don't want that sort of thing to be extractive, especially not in a field that has sort of a history of extraction.
Good point.
Just so everyone understands the process that we'll go through, it'll be similar to what we did in the pre-planning, and that part of the contract that we will sign with an architect will involve an exhibit design firm. And while curators, community members, and in this case, of course, various cultures that are represented within the area of this place-based museum, they'll be interviewed, and we will have a narrative developed through interviews. Now, the museum will control it, right? And what I mean by that is that they're not going to suddenly start writing about, you know, fish in the Chesapeake Bay or something, right? You know, we can turn around and say, no, we have a story within these bounds, so we control it. But they're going to be the ones that would see these people as a cultural resource and interview them and find out what's important to them, and what they would hopefully get from them is sources of information that they could then use to help write this narrative, which would start at a 30,000-foot level. We review it, and I would hope you would all be part of that review process. Then it gets narrowed down to the details. So that's part of what we pay for. So while curators and educators and other staffers will be intimately involved in the writing, really the physical mechanics of it, as well as the process of deriving the information that we'll be producing and presenting within the galleries, that will be done by the contractor.
Okay.
So it
And we
feels
won't be
like
we won't be going to the Monacan and asking them, you know, can you give us, you know, 15 pages of, you know, prose that we can turn into museum label by next week or something.
Right.
So,
but you know, it feels
they
like
should be an integral voice. I'm sorry,
so,
Len.
Joe, it feels to me though like a good first step would be to pull this roundtable discussion together to start that general conversation, because now I look at this from a marketing lens, you know, and I'm concerned about perceptions, and you know, in our world, perceptions are reality, and there's already built-in perceptions in the community about where the city's, how much the city's funding into this, and whether or not we're being, you know, diverse and representative of the full community. And I think now is the time for us to start, you know, dealing with those issues, at least getting this stuff out there before we get full bore into it. Just a little side note, there was, during the last snowstorm, there was some commentary on Facebook about the city not plowing a certain road downtown. And one person's comment was, well, you know, the city can pay enough money to put up enough money to build that silly museum downtown, but they can't, you know, plow our roads. Why are they spending money for that and not this? So there's that general perception, right, that the city's behind this, it's all being funded by the city and all that stuff. I think it's important as we have, now that we have time, because we're not funded yet, to kind of help change that perception and drive the message, you know, a little bit more to be that inclusive, more, you know, educational kind of, let's do this in the spirit of knowing kind of thing, you know. We certainly don't want anybody to feel left out, but on the other hand, we want to make sure that it's understood that, you know, we're dealing with facts.
Right.
So I propose we move forward on that first diversity, or this first roundtable here.
So Joe, this roundtable is going to also include conversations with the African American community, correct?
In our original discussions, yeah, we didn't leave anyone out in this, and so Siri had some ideas about people we could bring into this discussion. We of course talked about bringing in you know, representatives of the Monacan Nation. Now, of course, we're talking about perhaps other tribes as well, being that was appropriate. So, I think the ultimate goal, and I think we need to still kind of massage what we want to achieve here, but I'm seeing that the ultimate goal is to ensure that any stories that we put forth in the galleries that talk about people associated, whether in modern times, recent past, or ancient times, that the story is well informed by the appropriate people, and we're not just making assumptions about what the important stories are to be told.
Yeah. So the time frame for this next roundtable is what, April?
That is possible. We'll just have to see what availability of folks looks like. I would love it for it to be April because we also have the geology roundtable, or at least charrette, or however we're going to call it. That will be informed in a couple of weeks by our meeting with DMME. So we got a couple of things to do. We do have a little bit of time. We don't have to have these done and synthesized by July 1st, as Jonathan lined out. With the whole RFP process, we've got to dot the I's and cross the T's as far as timeframes, keeping things open to the public for transparency, eventually leading to, even when we select a firm, we have to post that selection for, I believe it's 2 business weeks before we can even sign a contract. So yeah, Jonathan's giving the thumbs up on that. So we have enough hoops to jump through with that, a lot of hurry up and wait. So I think that buys us some time over the next couple of 3 months to do these 2 roundtables.
Okay, well, so yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say one thing about April, at least here, and maybe it's different in other parts of the state, but you know, that is Mr. Jefferson's birthday month, and is, you know, is mid-April, and that tends to suck up a lot of the like historical panel conversation, if that makes sense. At least, you know, where I am, that might be different than other places, but I just put that out there, especially if we're thinking about pulling historians into the conversation too.
Yeah, I would encourage us to give ourselves a little bit more time maybe on this one. And one thing I'm thinking about is our first roundtable was with educators, and we had a lot of narrative for them to react to that was out of that pre-planning study. And with the geology, we also have a fair amount of narrative, but I don't know what they would react to if we were going to put a diversity panel together, what narrative from the pre-planning we would put before them to react to.
You know, in the discussion that I had with Diana Williams, it was, you know, more about really 2 things. How are you going to represent the original humans, you know, the presence of those original humans? And of course, I focused on the prehistoric mastodon hunting exhibit. But then the other big part that she was, and Carol's shaking her head, I'm not the scientist here, so I'm just kind of reacting to nice images I see. But the other part that I think she was really stressing was the whole inclusiveness stuff. You know, how do we make sure that this is welcoming and is inviting for the 30% of the population of our community that just doesn't feel like they're a part of this usually, these kinds of things, you know. And that was the other part of it, is making it so that it's accessible and it's interesting and it's just as, you know, comfortable and welcoming to all communities here, and not just, you know, the majority community of.
But that sounds like a different question to me than we're trying to get feedback on how the exhibit should be designed.
I agree.
And so that doesn't sound like the type of charrette or roundtable we've hosted in the context of other themes. I do think that's a valuable conversation. Don't get me wrong. I think that's a really valuable conversation, but it sounds a little different to me than what we're trying to do with regarding getting feedback on the current exhibit thinking.
So
May I argue that I think it should be different?
Yeah.
So do I.
I don't know that. I mean, the thing you have to keep in mind is that if we're serious about inclusiveness, that means opening up the discussion from the beginning. It doesn't mean presenting something to someone that's already been created and then say, please respond to this. We're talking about a conversation, I believe. And that is, I think that's going to actually give you something more to go with than if you were to go back and forth on creating something and then saying, let us get our feedback. I think that you're going to end up with something more meaningful, but I'm sure Siri could speak to this much better than me. It also means it's a different process. It means that you have to organize it differently. It has to be run differently. You still have to have goals. You still have to have outcomes that you're shooting for, but you just go about it in a very different kind of way.
One thing that I would say, and I'm sorry, you know, I'm new, so I'm still sort of trying to mentally situate myself in what we're talking about. is, you know, sort of what I was talking about originally was a conversation, right? It wasn't necessarily in service to a particular exhibit. And so if that's what we're talking about, then yeah, I agree with Carol. I think we're talking about, and Tom, I think we're talking about sort of separate things there. The other thing that I would say is I've heard us calling this a diversity roundtable. And I'm thinking to myself, what does that mean? What does that mean?
I'm glad you say that, because it confuses me all the time.
Are we talking about having a conversation, you know, an inclusive conversation around, you know, what it looks like to bring the you know, sort of a human-centered experience into, you know, conversations around natural history, or like, because that's, you know, that's not diversity work. I think I just want to clarify, you know, I think that's important to make a little distinction there. If we're talking about setting an inclusive table, you know, or just sort of like engaging a broader community, I think, you know, we want to be a little like careful about the language, right? Because I don't think that there's an intention to be doing diversity work, but I could be wrong about that, in which case, you know, tell me, because I just got here, so.
Go ahead, Joe. She said, go ahead.
All right, so what first of all, just so that that we're clear here, part of my job with this project is to ensure that we move the various processes along, starting with the state and the funding and everything else like that. We did do the pre-planning, and we do know that we're going to be integrating past cultures along different timeframes and so forth. So part of my job, of course, is to come up with the narratives for that, and to kind of, for lack of a better word, to play quarterback with that, to make sure that we're getting all the necessary information out there, and to have something that's going to be attractive, because we have to be sustainable. This is all about great sustainable impact. What I'm hearing now as part of the great sustainable impact is to include, as Len put it, the other 30% of people who may feel excluded. I have to admit, because of my particular background, I'm eyeballing the exhibit and the day-to-day attraction of that. And I think this is good. This is great. This is going to include perhaps an audience that maybe we're missing initially. But what I am going to need help from this group is that, again, I can talk all day about mastodons and Virginia Indians, and I can get Dr. Bassett, and I can get advice from Dr. Nash and her colleagues and stuff, and we can synthesize all that into an attractive exhibit to help with our day-to-day sustainability. If we're going to have a separate conversation on making sure that we have an inclusive input into this, I'm going to need some help about what that looks like. And this is a big committee, so I don't know if we want to have a smaller side conversation with part of the committee to try to begin to narrow down, because I'm trying to take notes on all this, and my minutes are going to come out a bit haphazard here. So I need help kind of narrow focusing, not so much with the exhibit part. I would love to talk to the Monacan. I would love to talk to other cultures and get their input on what should an exhibit have, what's the message we get across, and bring the educators in so we know that SOLs are covered and that their needs are covered. As far as the having the inclusive voice, where do we start? Who do we talk with exactly this year? I think we already talked about some of that, especially in our Charlottesville meeting. But then how do we apply that to what we're doing here? So I just want to lay that out there. From what I'm seeing so far, that's where I'm going to need some help.
Yeah, I think.
Go ahead, Len.
Like I said, I think, Joe, I think the issue, the thing we got to be careful is that we're not tone deaf to how things can be perceived, because we get so focused on the science part of it that we lose sight of general perception of it. And I think that's kind of what happened when that video got sent out. I mean, and still am very happy and pleased with the results that video created, and somewhat dismayed by the reaction we got in certain areas. But that just shows me that I was tone deaf to what's happening or what the perceptions are or the feelings are amongst the community when it comes to something like this. So I think the issue for us is, I think Carol's absolutely correct. It needs to be separate. It needs to be a separate conversation. I think including everybody's voice in this is going to be important, so that we, if nothing else, we at least understand that as we tell the story, that we're not creating perceptions that were unintended.
Yeah, I think if we can all agree that we're talking about two different conversations, and they each should be addressed in separate roundtables, it sounds like to me. Yeah. So, Joe, it feels like your comfort level is certainly on the side of design and getting input on the subject of people's, human influences in the valley early on. And then could we shift the other roundtable? You mentioned that there were two being planned. Can one of them be more focused on that community engagement and input? Joe?
The easy answer is
again, I don't think it's a roundtable. I think that's something else.
Okay.
And I think that conversation about how we reach out to the broader community is not just for this committee to consider, it's for the whole museum to consider. So I'm sitting here thinking, what is the charge to this committee? And the charge to this committee is to advocate for this campus in Waynesboro. And for that, we need to be attentive to the types of exhibits we want to have, but we also need to think about who are the folks that we need to advocate to. And maybe the advocacy part is, certainly reaching out to our legislators, but also within the community, like Len was saying, advocating for this project among the broader, citizenry, all of the folks that are going to be impacted by it. And to me, that's kind of a little separate from the exhibit design. And so I don't even see it as a roundtable.
So
I'm not sure what I see it as.
Yeah, I was going to say, what's an alternative to gathering small focus groups together or meeting with people individually? Len seems to have his ear to the ground with regard to people's commentary.
What I think we need to do is have a presence in the community that includes going to things like the Unity in the Community event that was held at the Rosenwald Center, that we did with CCR. Or being present, in other settings. I don't know whether there's opportunities reach out to, through the Boys and Girls Club. There's a lot of diversity that's represented there. Could we have an exhibit, or could we have an evening to talk about this project? So that's very different to me than actually having people come to us. It's about us going to them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that was definitely a point that was raised, that we can't expect them to come to us, that we've got to be purposeful and proportionate, but also to recognize that the general feeling is not one of welcoming and that we're really genuinely interested. It's not just lip service versus actual action. The unity in the community was I think a great event, and I'm glad we went, and I would certainly be a supporter of going every time they have it. But I can very vividly remember the very different conversations, a specific conversation I had with all those people that came through and judged their level of interest, general interest. And I think what was made clear to me when I had the conversation with Diana is you got to be receptive in a different way, right? And hearing the message, and to help these folks feel comfortable with displaying the message. I don't know what the answer to that is, but I think that if we don't address it the right way, then we run the risk of the backlash that we had with that video. Good news with the video is it's probably one of the best promotional pieces I've seen in a long time. That the company that did that job did an amazing job. They got a great message out there that resonated, and it created emotional responses. But some of that response was not positive. It was fairly negative. But the backlash really was directed at the city. The city took the hit for it more than anything, I think. But I think we have to also recognize that part of it. The city's a lightning rod when it comes to these issues, and there's some real raw nerves there. And anytime we're associated with a city-funded project or something that's related to the city, we catch some of that byproduct. I think we need to be aware of it. I think we got to make sure we're not tone deaf to it. I think we have to be proactive. I think we have to go to the community and understand how they perceive things and what base that they're coming from, for us to really appreciate how we're going to tell the story in a way that everybody feels included. That's my perception of it. But again, I'm looking at it from a marketing lens. I'm sensitive to perceptions because that's how people react. And, perception's reality. You could have the best mousetrap in the world, but if it's not perceived properly, nobody will take it. I'm just, again, and I'm also thinking about future funding, trying to get funding from, the community later on.
Greg, did you have some comments?
I think I just
froze. So I totally agree that there are two separate things, but I hear Len saying, tell the story, but is it hearing from so the perception is that we have not reached out to the entire population base that would be affected by this museum, nor is a representative of the entire population base in the decision-making part of this. So is it telling the right story, or is it having the entire population base represented and aware of what we're trying to do?
Greg, I would submit that we don't know, and that's the point. Okay. I think we need to reach out into that community to find out.
And the question becomes, how do we do that? I mean, there's been some suggestions that we go to the community through various avenues, whether it be through organizations or individuals who have come forth and, questioned. But I think we have to stay true to our mission as well. So, it's kind of a fine line as to how much, you want people to be accepting and enthusiastic about the museum and what we're attempting to do. So maybe it just comes down to a public awareness education need that we need to further expand upon. We've done a good deal of that already, but as you pointed out, not not to everyone. We haven't
Right.
touched everyone.
Well, we haven't even touched any of that community, actually. But
Yeah.
so, I would challenge the mission question by saying this is going to be a state-funded project. And the mission of the museum is to address the needs of the entire population of the Commonwealth. So I think we have to be aware, we have to be cognizant of that, and I also don't think that we really know. It's easy to get in a silo, without really extending out. Now, I will say that I think maybe the best approach is to start small and build a small group that we could maybe have conversations with to get started so we can reach into that community. And I've got a few names of people that Maggie was able to solicit through the school system that we probably might want to reach out to, that are folks that could have an interest in, understanding that they're at least in the sciences type of background. But I don't know. Maybe it's making a big deal out of nothing as well. But I think I don't think we want to fall into the same little trap that we fell into with the last video. That was our real first broad public exposure, extremely effective in communicating a message, and got received two very different ways. The message that was received were two very different messages. The vast majority thought it was great. They thought it was an amazing project for the city, made the city look great, all the rest of it. But there was a smaller percentage of people that were incensed that it didn't represent what this community properly looks like, and got very, very, very active about how incensed they were. So I think, we kind of stumbled into that, right, Joe? Wouldn't you admit? We kind of went into that thinking we were all good, and it was a really surprising reaction that I wasn't anticipating. Although I will say, I think a lot of that had to do with dynamics on perceptions with the city, and we just got wrapped into it because the city's involved, and we had city officials on that video. But still, that is a perception thing,
This is the first I've heard of this, actually, that there was a negative response. So I guess I'd like to know a little bit more about that. Apparently you've spoken to people individually. Joe, have you heard from members of the community in response to the videos?
Len passed some information on to me, and was kind enough to speak with, I think, one of the more vocal proponents of ensuring that we don't send, like, I think we, and Len helped me out here, but I think we unintentionally sent out a message that this project is not going to be welcoming to all. It's going to be, something that's an exclusive project or something like that.
Well,
and I can see that based upon the people who are involved.
So I'll just summarize it. I thought we discussed this at one of these meetings, or maybe it was just the CCR meeting that we had a longer discussion about it. So
I don't recall this topic before.
So the first video that we produced, we produced what, 4 videos, Joe? Was it 5 or 4? And the very first one was 4. We did it back in August. There was money left over from our funding for the feasibility study. And we had a company come up from Martinsville. They did a 1-day shoot. Joe asked myself and a few other people to kind of line up local people that were familiar with the project, that could speak intelligently about the benefits to the city and the community that this project would have, as somewhat of a, get the word out and build some broader support within the community. So I lined up, ex-Mayor Short and Mayor Henderson. I also had Greg Hitchen that spoke, Dwayne Jones, Maggie Van Huss, Rick Kane. Who else did we have, Joe? And Tom Benzing, right. So, and we all went over to the Wayne, and we I think you might have been asked if you would speak and you couldn't or something. But anyways, it was a great 4-minute video. It kind of talked about the highlight of the project, and everybody that spoke kind of talked about how it was going to have a positive impact in certain areas. So like Maggie discussed, the impact on the education, on our school education. And Rick Kane talked about as a realtor and a broker in the community, a business person in the community, how it would have an impact. And Greg talked about economic development, all that kind of stuff. Great video. They spent a 1-day shoot up here. We sat and they filmed us in the Wayne Theater. Then they went out on the street and did some footage down on the river, showed a couple people fly fishing, people walking the greenway and all that stuff. Send it out on Facebook. The museum sends it out on their Facebook page. And Joe, how many actual reach did we get? It was a couple thousand, if I remember.
The reach was really good. And Brian, I don't know if you remember those stats at all offhand, but the reach we've developed over time on social media has been really strong. So we probably had, we had 100 comments, 200 comments, plus all the other interactions with the video.
So were any of those comments negative?
Yeah, so that's what happened.
Some were negative.
So Diana Williams, who's a member of the school board, the elected school board here in the city, had a very negative reaction on Facebook, shared it on her page, said that, you know what, this video talks about how great the city is, but it only represents all white people. It doesn't represent 30% of the population. There isn't a person in there that's not, that's a minority, period. And it's a disgrace for the city. And then it got into this back and forth. All these people started, kind of piling on that basic comment. And then she took it offline and put it on her own personal Facebook account. So I'll be honest with you, I just regarded it. I kind of mentioned it to Joe. I said, this is starting to, this is out there, but I don't think it's going to amount to anything. So then, Maggie, I think you were in the meeting. Maybe you can describe her reaction, but there was a meeting between 4 agencies in the community that were dealing with COVID response. So it was the United Way, the YMCA, all that stuff. And Maggie, she just was very livid, actually.
She was. It was extremely negative. I don't even know that I have words to really convey the amount of emotion that she shared. And, when you can step back from the onslaught of it, quite candidly, it's easy to see where perceptions from a variety of different places did not all end up on the same table.
Right.
So that is something I think we have to be aware of. Anyway, from that conversation, I came back and I shared it with Lynn. I can't even remember if we shared it in a CCR meeting with our own actions, because, we're living here. And I thought, all right, we need to broaden our base on this committee, because some of it, bluntly, and I hope this doesn't offend anybody, is visual. We've got to be attuned to those visuals. And a lot of the negativity really seemed to come from the lack of diversity, the visual lack of diversity. We're not even getting into the scientific part of it or the knowledge part of it or anything else, but just the visual part of it is very white and was construed as offensive. And white from a city side, because there were all city people who are white, and then white from a community side, because it was all white people from the community who were in this video. And it had a negative reaction.
So it was enough for Maggie's executive director, Jeff Fife, to get on the phone and call Joe and say, you need to call this person. She's extremely upset, blah, blah, blah. Joe called me and said, Jeff thinks I should, and I've been telling, Joe and I have been talking all through. I kept saying, I don't think this is going to amount to anything, but you ought to be aware of it, just in case. And then Joe called me and said, Jeff wants me to call this person. I said, you know what, I think maybe you should, and let me call first. And because I'm a community person, let me find out what's going on here, because it appears to me this has been taken way out of context, because it wasn't intended to highlight the city, right? So I spoke with her and had a very good conversation with her. I'll be honest with you. She wasn't emotional. It was very direct, and I think it was a very good, clean conversation. And the takeaways I got from that was, one thing she said to me that has stuck with me. She said, look, she goes, when my children don't see somebody that looks like them, then they don't think it's for them. And that hit home for me, and I will be honest with you, I'm tone deaf to it, right? I don't live in that world. And it was enough for me to say, you know what, we don't really understand their perception, how things are perceived. And Tom, I go back to that unity in the community, and I explained to Diane, I said, I don't think we're trying to ignore anybody. In fact, we were there and we spoke with a lot of community members, but we had no interest. I mean, there was literally no interest. It was like, oh, that's nice, and they moved on. So the struggle, and she said, you can't expect them to come to you. You've got to engage them because of the history and the long time, the amount of generations that they've been ignored, essentially, is kind of what she was saying. And that I took to heart. And I think that's why I've brought it up here. I think it's important that we are at least, open and receptive, and we try to, endeavor to understand that perception so that we don't make that same mistake again.
Go in there. Lynn, and Maggie, thank you for sharing it. I didn't have any background on the video that we were talking about either. I think something that I would add that I think is important to center too is that I think it would be a mistake to get too caught up in like how many people complained, do you know what I mean? Or even did anybody complain? Because oftentimes especially when you're talking about communities that have been sort of consistently overlooked over time and are, accustomed to not being included or not being represented, folks don't necessarily always think it's worth it, you know what I mean, to even say anything about it. So I think that, so I would just keep that in mind too, as we're thinking about, sort of programs, and we're thinking about this as a sort of an overarching concept to Tom's earlier point, right? Not exclusive to this particular committee, and probably a conversation for a more broad, collection of the board, but that we're not only thinking about areas where someone has said, hey, I don't like that.
Right. Yeah, I agree. But it was interesting when Carol mentioned, one of the things that Diana brought up was specifically the Monacan Nation and the fact that we stole their land. And if we don't represent them in this museum and we don't get them involved in the design, then we're really not serving them. That's when I got back to Joe, and she gave me the phone number and contact information for Chief Monacan, and I called him and left messages, haven't received a call back. But now I understand, hearing from Carol, now I understand the issue. I didn't understand that. I don't know anything really about it. I was trying to make the connection for him and Joe and Dr. Bassett, which I've passed the information on to Joe. But now that Carol's put it in perspective, it's like, okay, this is a much more complicated issue. It's not a black and white kind of thing. And there's a lot of misperceptions. There's a lot of emotion around it. And I think for a project like this that has, it should be a general natural history thing. I mean, we're talking about natural history. We're talking about rocks and animals and fish and water that, it shouldn't even end up in that realm, but we can't ignore that, is all I'm trying to say from a perception standpoint. And I think part of this
it sounds like we have.
Yeah.
No, well, I was just going to say we have two very complex but very different issues, I think, on the table right now. And Joe, I hope that you feel that you've had enough direction on the one issue of the round table, including peace, and then this other community inclusivity issue. I think there's one that deserves more conversation, and maybe if everybody can kind of think on it a little bit and how we can address that as we move the project forward. And I agree with what Siri just said, that I don't think we should, count up the negative comments and feel like we have to speak to every single person. It does sound like Diane is someone that we need to have more conversations with, and I'm sure there are others as well. And Lynn and Greg and those of you who live in Waynesboro, you too live in Waynesboro, can give us some guidance on how we might, have some conversations.
And Tom, Robert Quinones has been asking some specific questions about our foundation board. So obviously he's got an interest. So maybe we should have a separate committee appointed by the board of trustees that's more general and talking about how to deal with these kinds of issues, as opposed to trying to get too deep into it here in this specific thing.
Yeah, and I would say that's already the case. We're asking the strategic planning committee at the board of trustees to consider broadening our reach to a more diverse community and simply benchmarking where we are. We don't even know where we are.
Yeah.
So we've got some very early steps we have to take before we can even think about a strategic plan for increasing diversity and our outreach to those groups. And so I do think it's part of a much broader discussion that needs to happen at the museum. And right now it's centered in the strategic planning committee. So, and that's a beyond what it's certainly very relevant to what we're talking about here in terms of this particular project. So yeah, I'll take Faye's advice and think on it some more.
Yeah, let's all do that.
All
And the strategic planning process, I think hopefully will help reveal, some ways forward for having these kind of discussions, not just in Waynesboro, but statewide as well.
Yeah.
Can we move on? The hour is behind us, and under old business, let's see, you talked about the drive-through. So we'll look forward to that. And also under old business, it's not listed there. I wanted to mention or bring up that the foundation, as you all maybe are aware, are seeking nominations to fill some vacancies. And Joe, is it 5 vacancies in all that looking at?
Yes, and at last count, unless Ryan, you have an update, we had 3 other nominations. And just so everyone knows, there is no minimum number of people that are supposed to be on the foundation, or maybe it's a really low number like 15, but the maximum is 30.
Right.
So I think at the current time we have 25.
Well, at one time, this committee talked at length about expanding the foundation board to include more representation from the Waynesboro area. And I know that Irby Nash and Lynn, I think folks have been talking about this now, to try to get some additional appointees. And so I think the nomination form was sent out to members of the board, but I just wondered if you all had any thoughts or suggestions. I personally feel like it would be good to have, we have Lynn and Tom and myself being here in Stanton, but that's close. And Carol, of course, for being in Harrisonburg, and then Maggie on this committee. But any thoughts on either individuals or how to perhaps seek some additional representation that would benefit us, particularly as we move towards raising private funds, if it comes to that, which we think it probably will.
So Faye, I challenged the CCR board to come up with some nominations, because I explained that I felt that this was probably the most important time for us to have representation because of the soon to be local need for funding. And I also stressed upon them that if anybody that we know wants to have a real impact on a project that's going to have local community impact, this is probably the best opportunity they'll have in the next many years. Bill Alexander was going to think on it, and I owe him a phone call. He was going to suggest some people. And I know that Irby has talked to you about a few other candidates, but I think it's really important for us to identify not just somebody that can add value, but somebody that knows people that
Right.
that really support this, that can, be influential in, encouraging donors to put some real monies up. So.
Well, also, I think, Joe, there was discussion about not only official foundation board members, but also having kind of a separate advisory fundraising group appointed through the foundation, but they would be, you know, located more Waynesboro centric.
Yeah.
So that to me makes a lot of sense, because the people I can think of, the people Irby and I talked about, are not necessarily people that are going to want to serve on a board that's based in Martinsville and be expected to they themselves raise money. That, you know, I think to have some advisor sorts of people who have the deep pockets that can support the project might make better sense than to try to fill up the foundation board with a whole bunch of Waynesboro people.
Yeah, and this is pre-pandemic, but our conversations with the foundation board were met positively. The general idea, not meant to be set in stone, but to start a conversation, was just a suggestion that we alter the bylaws of the foundation to create an advisory board, for lack of a better word. Might even specifically be called the Waynesboro Campus Advisory Board. That might have a representative such as like Len, who's also the person attending our Board of Trustees meetings, but to have an advisory board of, say, 9 people whose sole charge is to develop relationships, help with fundraising and so forth for specifically the Waynesboro campus, not requiring them to come frequently to Martinsville, but to have periodic meetings up in Waynesboro with reports regularly delivered to the president of the foundation. We also saw this as a long-term goal because as we've talked about many times in the past, the idea that, you know, Waynesboro can become a model for this institution so that in the future there are several or more branches around Virginia to ensure that every citizen is within easy drive of a natural history museum experience. And so every campus could have its own advisory board. So this would lay the groundwork within the bylaws of the foundation to kind of create that entity. So it's something that we can revisit with the foundation, especially now things look positive as far as July 1st in the new fiscal year go. So I suppose, Ryan, this is something we can put on the agenda for the May meeting. And so we can brief Mary on that.
Okay, that sounds good. Any other comments on that or any other business items we need to talk about? Hearing none, is it all right with y'all that we adjourn?
I'll second
Yes.
that.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, and we'll wait and see if we need them in April. We've kind of been playing this by ear depending on the needs. So, and I'm sure in the meantime, Joe and Ryan and Jonathan will keep us posted on what's going on with the upcoming event and so forth. So, all right. Thanks, everybody.
I
Thanks,
sent,
everyone.
just real quickly, I sent the link to the document I put together to Jonathan and Joe. I didn't have everyone's email address and I asked that they forward it to you all.
Great. Thank you, Carol.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.